Hello, today we have a special episode to comment on some current action. Our guest today is an important advocate and fighter for the rights of the people of South Africa. Guest today is Neil Coleman from the International Institute for Economic Justice, and I want to give him an opportunity to introduce himself.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity. As you say, I'm from the Institute for Economic Justice, which is a progressive policy think tank and research institute, which works very closely with civil society organizations in South Africa, advancing progressive policy alternatives. And one of the big projects that we're working on is the project around basic income. In fact, that is my focus. I coordinate and lead the project on basic income. And we've been doing that for several years. And the big issue in South Africa at the moment is a contestation around the social relief of distress grant, which was introduced during COVID in 2020. And unlike many countries around the world, after COVID, that grant hasn't been terminated, it's been continued. And the reason for that is the extreme level of poverty and hunger in South Africa, which might surprise some of your viewers and listeners, because South Africa is regarded as an upper middle income country. So why do we have such high levels of poverty and hunger and inequality? Well, it's all about the legacy of apartheid and colonialism in South Africa, decades of separating Black people in South Africa out into the remote areas, a lack of industrialization. We have a very small informal economy compared to other sort of developing economies. And we also have a very small peasantry. Very few South Africans have access to the land because of the impact of colonialism in our country. So all of that means that people who don't have jobs in South Africa, from the Black majority mainly, and the youth in particular, as well as the women who suffer from this very intense level of poverty and hunger, they don't have any other alternative source of income if they don't have employment. And our unemployment levels are amongst the highest in the world. The rate is over 42% unemployment. So we have nearly 12 million unemployed people in South Africa. In fact, a statistical survey is about to be released for the second quarter of 2023, which we expect will continue to show unemployment rates of between 42 and 43%. So the social relief of distress grant that I mentioned was a very important grant to assist particularly adults who are living in poverty, because in South Africa, we have a child support grant and we have an old age support grant, but everyone from the age of working age, from age 18 to 59, didn't have access to any form of income support. So the introduction of this grant during COVID was very, very important in combating the worst forms of hunger and poverty. But now there's a big fight going on, and that's what I'm going to talk about this grant, about its extension, about the exclusion of millions of people from the grant. And about how can we convert this into a permanent basic income grant.
So can you please what is the amount of the grant? Is it on the poverty rate, or is it higher? Is it lower? And if you would compare these prices from other countries?
That's one of the big problems. That's one of the issues that we are taking to the government to court on, because the level of the grant is 350 Rand. Which is about $17 a month, So it's very, very low. And the food poverty line, in other words, the statistical determination of what is required for the most basic level of food to survive, is double that. It's nearly 700 Rand. So there is no scientific basis for the figure at which it's set. And this is one of the issues we're raising in the court case that we're currently bringing against the government, together with our partners who are working on the ground in communities with beneficiaries. And amongst the other issues that we're dealing with are the massive exclusion of people from this grant. Because, as you know, and the work that BN has done and other organizations like yourselves, is poverty targeting excludes many of the poor. And in South Africa, government estimates and our estimates are that at least 16 million people should be benefiting from this grant, but only about 8 million are currently benefiting. And the reason for that is because of a lot of regulations have been put in place which exclude the poorest South Africans from qualifying for the grant. So again, we're taking these regulations to court to challenge them. And a lot of this, importantly, a lot of this has been driven by the National Treasury or Finance Department in South Africa, which has tried to reduce the amount that is spent on the grant and has instructed the department, which is responsible for rolling out the grant, the Department of Social Development, to put in place regulations which basically exclude millions of South Africans. So in March last year, about 10.9 million South Africans were receiving the grant. And then the Treasury put in place these regulations, and now that dropped down to below 8 million South Africans. But as I said, it's actually around about 16 million who should be receiving this grant. And it's the means testing, it's the exclusionary questions, it's many aspects of the regulations which is preventing poor people from accessing this grant. And this is in the context of extreme hunger in the country. We had a tragic situation yesterday where a mother in a very poor rural area in South Africa in the Eastern Cape killed herself and her 3 children because she was so hungry that she saw no alternative and ended up killing herself and her 3 children. This is the tragic level of desperation in our society. A survey done by a university health department this year found that 1 in every 5 households, 1 in every 5, was sending a family member out to beg for food on a regular basis. So this is the level of poverty and hunger in the country that we're trying to deal with. And so what we're saying is that this grant must be extended, but it must be improved. The level must be improved, and it must be inclusive. It must include the millions of South Africans who are currently being excluded.
Is it like that hunger problem? Is it only a problem that the people can't afford the food, or is it also a problem that there is not enough food available?
No, there is food availability. I mean, although one of the issues, like many developing countries, is since the Ukraine war, there's been a lot of profiteering by the food corporations. So the level of food inflation has been very, very high, and went up last year to about 14%. So that's one of the other things that we challenge in the court case, is that the amount of the grant, the 350 Rand or the $17, has stayed the same since 2020, even though inflation has increased. So in real terms, in terms of our constitution, that's a retrogression. It's a backward movement in the right to access social security, because the value has been massively decreased. And we calculate that if inflation is taken into account, the current level of the grant should be about 450 Rand. But we actually are asking the court to get the government to connect the value of the grant to an objective poverty line, like the food poverty line, saying that at the very least, the grant should be pitched at the food poverty line, because you cannot have a grant that's supposed to deal with hunger and poverty unless it is giving a value which is related to the very, very basic needs that people have.
At 700, right? Or how much is?
Yeah, so the food poverty line is currently 663 Rand. But that was in 2022. And if you include the inflation from this year, it'll be close to 700 Rand. So it's roughly double the value of the grant. And the broader poverty line, what's called the upper bound poverty line, is about double that. It's about 1,400 Rand a month. In terms of not even affording basic necessities, just giving children and adults basic nutrition, anything less than 700 Rand is just not able to buy the food that people require.
That's a very difficult situation. And the story you told me, as a mother, and So do you have like other kind of support for these people? Like, are there like private institutions or so, or are they just suffering right now?
There are some sort of charity institutions. There's a very well-known charity organization called Gift of the Givers in South Africa, which also operates internationally, which rolls out feeding schemes. The South African government does have a feeding scheme for children in poor schools, but of course that doesn't get to children under the age of 6. But also in many areas in South Africa, that feeding scheme is not operating effectively because of the cutbacks by our Treasury, who have cut back the amounts which are allocated to these schemes. So, we argue, together with organizations like BN, is that cash transfers directly into the poor's pockets is the most effective way of combating poverty and hunger, because what has been shown by all the research that the Institute for Economic Justice, my organization, has done, as well as international organizations, is that the poor use the cash very carefully and very effectively to deal with their immediate needs. And that's the president of South Africa, who we have had some discussions with around this issue, has acknowledged that this grant has been very effective in combating the worst forms of poverty and hunger, and has actually stimulated the poor economies by pumping money into those economies. It's actually improved sort of self-employment, it's improved economic activity. So you can imagine if this grant was doubled, for example, which is what we're calling for, the stimulus impact into those economies would really help to move the wheels of those economies in the poorest communities in South Africa. So it's very much part of, we don't see the basic income grant or the social relief of distress grant as a silver bullet or something that will solve all problems. It must be combined with other forms of economic strategies, which will help to promote self-sufficiency, economic activity, small businesses, employment, and so on. But the immediate reality is that people, as I said, like with that tragic story of this woman who killed herself yesterday, people need the help now. They can't wait for complicated infrastructure and employment plans. They need assistance now, and cash transfers have been shown to be very, very effective and quick. Even though we've got many problems with this grant, as I've outlined, we're also very supportive of the fact that it was rolled out so quickly with such an impact. We're just saying that many more people could be included, and that if it's properly designed, it could form the basis for a permanent system of basic income in South Africa that could get to many more people in the country.
So before focusing more about your battle and about like the policies of the topic, could you describe some of the conditions that are set now and that are excluding people from getting the grant?
Yes. So for example, the means test. Remember, I told you the food poverty line is around about 700 Rand now. The means test is 624 Rand, which means that anybody who has any income in their bank account, which is more than 624 Rand, or I'm trying to convert it into dollars, about $30, they are excluded from accessing the grant. And what we find is that many desperate South Africans who don't have employment are getting assistance from relatives. There's a strong social solidarity in South Africa where people give each other money and support each other to buy food, etc., etc. But when you get that money in your bank account, immediately you become excluded from receiving the grant, even though it's not a regular form of income. So one of the things that we're challenging in the court case is to say it should only be a regular form of employment and income above a certain level that would exclude you, not ad hoc payments or gifts or child support maintenance or things like that. So that's one of the important things that excludes people from getting access to the grants. But there are other regulations which also require people to give information which excludes them unfairly from the grant. Also, what we find is that some of the databases which register whether you received unemployment insurance, for example, or whether you were employed at some point, so many of these databases are inaccurate. So people are being falsely excluded. Another problem is that, like in many other countries around the world, the system is now being digitalized. It's being put online. So people who don't have smartphones, who don't have the literacy and the ability to apply online, are excluded from the system because they can't apply physically.
Is that a
It's a
significant
It is a significant problem. It's a significant barrier. You know, we as the Institute for Economic Justice acknowledge that, you know, online systems, digitalization, et cetera, if properly applied, can assist in rolling out social security, but it shouldn't be done in an exclusionary way. And that's what we're saying to the court, is that you cannot exclude people who don't have access to smartphones, who don't have access to computers, et cetera. They should be able to apply and receive their money physically as well. So there are many issues, there are many areas of exclusion that we are challenging in this court case.
So let's focus on the important question. Why? Why are they cutting that money instead of expanding it?
Yes, you know, we have, like many countries around the world, we have a paradigm or a philosophy in our treasury, our finance department, of austerity. Their view is that the only way to control the finances of the country is to cut back on public spending, to cut back on social grants, to cut back on a whole lot of areas. So we have a situation not just in the issue of social grants, but in the area of health, for example, where we have many nurses and health workers who are unemployed now because the government austerity framework is not allowing for them to be employed. And in fact, a lot of those people are leaving South Africa and are looking for work in other parts of the world. I think this sort of classic conservative macroeconomic framework has been adopted in South Africa, and a very famous economist by the name of Ha-Joon Chang, based at the London School of Economics, basically looking at South Africa, said, you know, our government is paralyzed by caution. That was the words he used, paralyzed by caution, because we are so conservative when it comes to economic expenditure. If you look at a country like the United States, I'm not saying we have an economy like the United States, but if you look at what they're doing in the United States or in Brazil or, you know, other developing economies, they understand that you need to inject a stimulus into the economy in order to recover from these conditions of economic depression. And that's been done very effectively. In South Africa, we're doing the opposite. And that's driving our economy deeper and deeper into a situation of depression, certainly for the majority of people in the country. That's not the case for the elite, for the privileged few, but certainly for the majority, that is the reality.
Just like to comment on that, it's really stupid how much politicians around the world support the idea of austerity, despite that the results, the data from the US, from the UK, or around the world always shows us that it has a negative impact, while
absolutely
putting more money in the economy has a positive impact, creates not like positive externalities, especially in developing countries like South Africa with a lot of growth potential still. So
yeah, and I mean, you know, there's an experiment which you can talk about, which is in Southern Europe, which is Greece. You look at Greece, and then you look at Portugal. Greece and Portugal were both on the same austerity track. They were pushed by the creditors and the International Monetary Fund to impose extreme austerity. Greece did it. Portugal refused. Look at Portugal now. The society and the economy is booming. Greece, wiped out a quarter of their GDP, massive employment loss, suicide rates very high, and so on. So you've got a practical sort of experiment there that shows you precisely what you were saying, that austerity has failed, and but there still is this, and it's not. It's in part irrational, but in part it's because our economy is in South Africa and many other parts around the world are servicing the financial sector, and the financial sector actually supports policies of austerity. And I think that helps to explain why they're pursuing this despite its apparent irrationality.
So it's it's the main party in South Africa is the African National Congress, right?
That's right, yeah.
So
yeah.
Are they normally neoliberal in their policies? Or like for austerity policies?
It's for, there's a dichotomy or schizophrenia in policies in South Africa. On the one hand, you have like the political parties, like the ANC, they support some policies which are developmental, but then the government, the dominant faction within government, supports neoliberal economic policy. So you have a very powerful treasury. So this is a classic case in point with the basic income, is that the ANC has passed a resolution at the end of last year supporting the introduction of basic income, and they've even supported the introduction of a wealth tax in South Africa. But our treasury and our government is pulling in completely the opposite direction. So this is the battle that we are fighting. We have a support from the department which is rolling out this grant. The Department of Social Development also supports a basic income. Our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has gone on record as saying that he supports the introduction of some form of basic income in South Africa. But the forces of fiscal conservatism are very powerful in South Africa. So there is this contestation that's going on. And many organizations in civil society are now part of a coalition called the Universal Basic Income Coalition, are trying to advance these arguments. We have a meeting pending with the president, which was supposed to happen a couple of weeks ago, which we're hoping will happen in the next few weeks, in which we want to put forward these positions. And we also are quite confident or quite optimistic that this court case will yield some positive results, because what the government is doing is in violation of Section 27 of our Constitution, which provides that social security must be progressively realized for all those who need social assistance in South Africa. And it's clear that people do need that social assistance, and also that what government is doing is rolling back or what lawyers call, having a retrogression in the provision of those rights. And the United Nations Committee on Social and Economic Rights has also argued that South Africa is in violation of its commitments and needs to provide permanent income support for the adults from age 18 to 59. So we think the arguments are strong. We think the evidence is strong, and the social forces supporting this are strong, including our trade unions in South Africa who support this call for a basic income. So we'd be happy to report in a few months' time. Hopefully we'll be able to report some progress, but this has been a long battle and is going to take a while.
So I want to focus more on like the court and about the opinion, but like the last question before talking more about the case. I know that there are always like different ways, but like in the current government budget, is it affordable, like to keep it or to
yes.
It is.
Yes. So yes, that's a very good question. So the budget for this current grant this year is 36 billion rand, which may sound a lot, but it's less than 2% of the budget. It's less than 2% of the budget. And a paper by the UN WIDER has argued that half the South African population is benefiting from that grant, either directly or indirectly. The figure they gave was 31 million people, and we have a population of around 60 million. So it's a very efficient form of expenditure. There's very little corruption in the transfers of the grants. And so less than 2% of the grant is benefiting half the population. You can see that's a very efficient use of the expenditure. In the last couple of years, the government had an overrun of the revenue of about 250 billion rand. In other words, about 8 times the cost of this grant was received in extra revenue over and above what the government was expecting. That was as a result of the commodities boom. But again, we talk about the macroeconomic conservatism of the government. Instead of using that to assist people, they instead use that to spend the money on debt, on paying back debt. So it's about priorities. It's about political priorities and political will. The money is available. The IEJ, our institute, has done extensive research on financing options available to finance a basic income. And we've put on the table 18 forms, 18 tax modalities, which can be used to finance the grant. And a number of other institutions have supported us and have also proposed things ranging from a wealth tax to a financial transactions tax and other ideas. So this can be done if there's a political will. There's no doubt. And government commissions and inquiries have also supported us on the idea that this can be done. It's sustainable. And like in many other countries around the world where the debate on basic income comes up, the conservatives throw out these huge amounts which it'll cost, never talking about what the returns to the economy will be, how much will be paid back in terms of tax by people who are now consuming for the first time, the stimulus benefits to the economy, the health benefits, all these many benefits which have been documented internationally by studies from the UK to pilots that have been done in many countries around the world. So this has been documented, and this is some of the evidence that we're hoping to put to our president when we meet with him.
And because that's also important, especially now, do you think that it will increase inflation?
With the very low levels of demand in the economy, the strong sort of view and evidence is that it will not have a massive inflationary effect. We've done some modeling on this and other elements, and what it shows is that the macroeconomic sort of factors or the macroeconomic elements of the society actually remain fairly stable, including the debt to GDP ratio, the deficit to GDP ratio, the levels of inflation, and so on. And this seems to be the strong evidence from around the world.
Perfect. So it seems that it's doable, it's sustainable. So you just have to win the case and to convince the politicians. Is public opinion on your side?
Public opinion is largely on our side. There's no political party in South Africa who's really come out in opposition to basic income. It was like the national minimum wage when it was introduced. Some people opposed it, but now in Britain, under the Conservative Party, it's the most popular policy since the Second World War. Any government who wants to win an election, and we've got an election in South Africa next year, it's not rocket science that if you give income to people, they are going to support that because they desperately need it and it benefits them directly. So even from a narrow party political point of view, it makes total sense. And there is no recent opinion poll, but we're confident, and in fact, we are wanting to in the next few months. That's one of our proposals, is to conduct a public opinion poll. But we're confident that public opinion will be very, very strongly in favor of this. Of course, the problem in South Africa, as in many countries, is that there's lots of conservative ideas that are thrown around that this will create dependency, that people will misuse the money, et cetera, et cetera. And what the IEJ has done is we've looked at the international evidence and we've put out simple fact sheets, a series of 7 fact sheets, which is available on our website to your listeners and viewers, which sets out the evidence on, does it create dependency? Does it stop people from entering into the job market, etc.? And what the international evidence shows is in fact the very opposite, that it creates independence, it assists women in asserting their independence, it assists young people into the labor market, it assists economic activity, and so on and so forth. So while there is an ideological contestation, we find that people are very receptive to these arguments once the evidence is put in front of them.
So your case is now that you are saying that the current level, or like the current exclusion, is not in accordance with the South African law, because it's not progressive and because it excludes a lot of people who deserve that money. Or is it?
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right. That's right. It's unlawful. It's unlawful and exclusion because it's irrational, it's discriminatory, it's retrogressive. And our courts have, upheld the constitution. We have a strong constitution in South Africa. So we're hoping that the constitutional arguments will be very strong in this case.
And do you see like any potential problems or any potential barriers in your case?
They're always, particularly in legal cases, the courts sometimes tend to be reluctant to get involved in issues of budgets and government allocations and stuff like that. So we expect the government in responding will try to argue that they don't have the resources to be able to do this, and so on and so forth. But let's see. We're positive that the case has good prospects of success.
And if you win the case, the government will be forced to stop that exclusion, right?
Yes, they will have to change the regulations, and we've also asked for the court to require that they put a plan in place to progressively roll out and improve the value of the grant. So we're hoping that will be successful.
And I guess it will also, like, if there are like elections soon, then it will be bad for the government. It will be bad, like, if it seem like they're defending a case against the grant, right? And
yes, I think this is. Yes, I mean, particularly coming before the elections, I think government is quite sensitive to this. A lot of the constituency of the ANC are poor people, particularly in rural areas. There's the urban support base has been eroded somewhat, so they rely very strongly on that rural poor support base. So we think this will have a strong impact.
are you doing also like strong work in contacting these people and talking with them and promoting your case? Or are you more focused on
well, as I mentioned, the IEJ is in coalition with other organizations, and one of the groups is called Pay the Grants. And Pay the Grants is a community-based organization which organizes beneficiaries. And we have about 80 affidavits from people on the ground who speak about their realities and what they've experienced. And Pay the Grants are co-applicants in our case. So they are mobilizing in communities, and we're doing ongoing education and discussion in those communities.
So is there any way people in South Africa can support you, or people internationally who believe in your cause can support you, or like help you in any way in what you're doing?
Yes, I think it's just important to raise consciousness about the case, to support us. There is the possibility of an international amicus coming into the case, supporting the case. Those are things which there's been some interest in, but just in general, raising awareness, raising discussion. We know the BN conference is coming up. We would very much like to talk about the South African experience there, because South Africa actually now is probably the first country in the global South which is moving towards a permanent basic income grant. Up till now, it's been experiments, in a village in Kenya, in a village in Namibia, stuff like that. Now in South Africa, this is a national thing. It's in every community, every part of the country. And if it's transformed into permanent basic income, this will be the first permanent basic income grant, in the global South and possibly in the world.
In the world, not only in the, there have been some experiments in Iran, but except Iran, it would be the first one in the world. So
yeah,
I wish you all the best, and I'm sure
thank
that
you very much.
we'll talk again later, after your case, or if it's necessary again, and we'll have a chance to hear more about you, about the topic.
Yes.
And let's hope that we'll talk again when there are more positive news. And I wish you all the best.
Thanks very much, and good luck for the BN conference.
Is there anything else you want to say to the public or so, or?
No. Just keep supporting us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.